Today we're talking about Empire of the Vampire, and I was going to put a review up on this earlier in the week. Actually, the day that I was going to record the video, I backed out, I got cold feet, and I recorded a video that said books I probably will never finish or series I'll never finish, and I did that instead, and I just kind of put it in there. And I even said in that video, I was going to make this video, and I totally said, no thank you, I'm not going to do that, because I so aggressively disliked this book that I was afraid it was going to turn into just a big rant review. I've done that once, exactly one time on the channel, and I regretted it as soon as I did it. I still pretty much regret it to this day. I don't like putting that kind of content out there. I'm here to talk about the things I love, and I'm not here to rail against things that I really didn't like. But the response to that overwhelmingly was, we would love to hear your thoughts on this book, considering how much you didn't like it. So I ultimately did decide to make the video, partially a little bit from encouragement from the comment section, but then also because I realized that it's valuable on two levels. One, it adds value to me as a reviewer, because it's just as important for you to understand what I don't like and why as it is for you to understand what I do like and why. Then, on top of that, the review situation here on YouTube for Empire of the Vampire is so heavily skewed into the positive and to the absolute perfect 10 out of a 10, could not have a flaw in the single book, and I found it to be not that. It's not even like people are like, oh, it's good, it has some flaws here and there, but it's a good book. No, it's like perfect 10, 5-star, and I can't comprehend somebody actually enjoying this read, let alone, like, even a little bit, let alone giving it 5 stars. I don't understand. So I feel like I'm going to try and balance the YouTube scales a little bit here by putting out like one of the only negative reviews you're ever going to see for this book. But I'm going to try to do it in a calculated and measured way, and I'm going to try very hard not to rant. Also, I will not be doing a proper review of this book. I will not be giving a rating or a number because I did not finish this book. I DNF'd it. I didn't even make it. I almost made it to the halfway point. I was like, there's 6 parts to the book. I read part 1. I was not enjoying myself. I read part 2. I was really not enjoying myself. And I started part 3, and I told myself, if I can just finish part 3 and I'm still not enjoying myself, I'll quit. And I got to like 3 chapters from the end of part 3, and I just closed the book. And I put it down. I said, I do not know why I'm beating my head against the wall, torturing myself, getting to the end of part 3. Like, that's going to somehow change my experience. And I realized it's dumb to do that to myself. And there's no sense in finishing anything. So I made it not to the end of part 3, almost. And I said, I can take literally no more. Now, I do want to start the video off by critiquing the storytelling and the structure and some things like that. Some actual objective things that I can kind of critique, because there are a lot of bad and a lot of things that I really disliked in this book. And I want to do that before I get to the big one, which is by and far the thing that was the most upsetting and the hardest to get through, which is just the writing itself. So before I get to that one, which is the one that I have the most tendency to try and slip into rant territory on, and I'm going to take care of some other critiques first. And these ones, I will say, that I'm going to talk about here, all these negatives leading up to the writing, I think are forgivable. If there was one here or one there or something, just a bad thing. Most books have bad things in them, something that you just didn't jive with or something that you just didn't like. So pretty much any one of these things would be easily forgivable if there was something else in the book that I had to latch on to that I was enjoying. Unfortunately, that didn't exist in this book, and it was just bad stacked on top of bad, stacked on top of bad, or at the very least, things that I wasn't enjoying, stacked on top of things I wasn't enjoying. So we're going to start this off with lazy world building, and by that I mean everything is just French, okay? And I'm like, oh, okay, so this takes place in medieval France. No. And so then I was like, okay, maybe a alternate reality version of France. No. So it takes place in a fantasy world. Okay. So normally in a typical fantasy, where you create a magical fantasy world, you create magical fantasy words and magical fantasy things and magical whatever. And a lot of times the author will take inspiration from, say, England. So all of their made up fantasy worlds sound very English, or they are English words with like a weird twist, or they'll take inspiration from France. And then all of their words sound very French, or are French words with a twist. And here he said, no, we're not doing any of that. It's just French. And you're like, but no twist? He's like, no twist. And you're like, so then it's France. No, it's not. So it's an alternate France? No, it's not. It is the laziest attempt at creating a unique fantasy world that I have ever seen in my life. And I would have been so much happier if he just made it medieval France. The nicest thing that I can say about it is that the world building is just uninspired and uncreative. Then next up would be his generic trauma backstory. It was, once again, it feels like such lazy writing. He comes up with the most generic backstory you've ever heard of in your life. I was born and I grew up with my mom and my stepdad, and my stepdad beat me, and then my sister was infected by a vampire, which was traumatic, but then she attacked and I had to kill my sister. And it's like everything, it was like literally like he created what would be the most generic backstory I could come up with for this particular story. And he came up with like bullet points, and then he just went through checking them off. And once again, this would be forgivable if it was there was like a little bit of added depth or nuance or something, because there are so many stories, especially that I read, that are just generic retellings of every other story that you've ever read. And that's fine, so long as you give me something to latch onto. Give me some depth, some nuance, explore a scene or two, kind of make me feel something in there, and do it maybe in a slightly different way. Give me a twist. And this felt like he was literally just reading it off. And then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And you're like, you could give me something else? You could give me anything in there? No, because there's just a complete and utter lack of depth and nuance. And that's going to stretch through most of the complaints that, especially through the next one. Lack of nuance is a huge problem for this book. And I will say that the nuance that I feel like has been stripped from this book is replaced with an attempt at being edgy and cool. Everything is because it's edgy and cool, not because we have an underlying reason to do it or it has an underlying meaning behind it. No, this guy has a traumatic backstory because traumatic backstories are edgy and cool. Now, all of this leads me into my last and my biggest complaint as far as the structure and the storytelling before I get to the actual writing, and that would be that the main character is a crackhead. And I mean that like very literally. He's like a crack addict. And that's how it's presented. You know, he's a drug addict. He's addicted to blood. I know it's blood, it's not crack, but he's like very early in the book he slides him a not crack pipe and blood, which is powdered blood. So he slides him a pipe, and the powder that he's going to smoke from the pipe, not crack in his not crack pipe, or whatever. It's whatever the allegory for drugs that you want to use is, but it's literally smokes it out of a pipe. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Anyway, and then he slides it to him and his hands start shaking, and he can't control his hands from shaking because he wants the drug that bad. Now, this had the potential to be so good because he has, as a half-breed, a bloodlust. And by doing this thing, he can control his bloodlust. But by doing this thing, it's a severe drug, which is also a severely addictive thing. That could have been such a good storytelling beat. Literally, like, what is the lesser of two evils? You are damned if you do, and you are damned if you don't. This is the one thing in the book that had by far the most potential to be like really rich, genuine storytelling. Like, dude, you're if you're a half-breed because you can't control your bloodlust. The only way you can control your bloodlust is with this, but it's like literally like crack. Now, he even tees it right up for himself. He actually has the interviewer at some point say to Gabriel, so you only did this drug to subdue your bloodlust. And Gabriel's response is, no, I did it because I was addicted. Are you for real? Like, are you? We had it. You had it right there. You said it in the book. The thing that could have been the most in-depth and nuanced conversation this book had to make, and instead you switched it from that to, no, don't get it twisted. My main character is not a drug addict because he has to be, because it's a necessity for him. My main character is a drug addict because being a drug addict is edgy and cool. And the writing of it was literally borderline offensive to me. Now, I will admit right here up off the top that I am predisposed to have a problem with this type of storytelling because I have a history. I come from a family of like alcoholics and drug addicts. I myself do not do anything of any kind because I have had struggles in my life where I had excessive drinking. Then I also lost one of my very best friends at the age of 26 to a drug overdose. So I am predisposed, or maybe even a little biased, to have issues with this particular subject if it's handled tactlessly and tastelessly. So I will say, if you didn't even notice, if you had zero issues with it, you're like, I didn't understand, maybe that's just me. I do want to say I do have a built-in bias for this one particular subject if it's, like I said, handled very tastelessly. Also, he might later on in the book ditch this whole tough guy, I'm only a drug addict because I'm edgy and cool, and eventually have that nuanced conversation that I was missing from the first half of this book. That conversation might happen eventually. I will never know. I'll never get there. And then last but not least, which is by far the worst thing about this entire book, and the reason that I just had to close it and I couldn't finish, because like I said, all of that other stuff is ultimately forgivable if I can just find something to connect with through the book. I'll at the very least finish it. I might not like it, I might not enjoy it, but I'll at least finish the book. And that would be the writing. And it's just terrible. Like, it's so bad, I cannot put it into words how bad the writing in this book is. The best description that I can come up with for this book based on the writing is, this book is an edgelord's wet dream. Like I said, the writing is bad, but the prose is especially bad because it makes this attempt at being purple, but instead it kind of fails, which ultimately the writing then ends up sounding like an edgy emo teenager's bad poetry. With way too many F words, by the way. And also, I have been guilty of using probably more F words in my life than are ultimately necessary, by far. So I am guilty of saying that word way too much. And that's okay. But he takes that like to the nth degree, and then he tries to like be creative with it. But then he also is like, he's like, oh, you goblin turd guzzling monster, my face. And it's just like, what are you even saying? Like, the sentences don't even make sense at a certain point. Like, it's too much. And then of course it's just bad, like cringe. The level of cringe in the dialogue is unbelievable. There's of course like the lines like where he taps the bag on his hip and he's like, behold the bag that I keep the fucks that I give. Or like when somebody asks him why he's not dead and he's like, because the devil didn't want me and God was afraid to open the door. Or there's a girl at some point where I forget what her problem is, but she like gives this weird line where she's like, oh, I'd tear the wings off an angel to fly this cage, which sounds like something a rich, angry teenage girl would say when her parents bought her a BMW instead of the Corvette that she wanted. You know, just like, oh, I'd tear the wings off an angel to fly this cage. Like, it doesn't. Oh, it's so terrible. Now, I want to say real fast here before I get any further, I'm not trying to invalidate the feelings of teenagers. There are, especially rich teenagers, there are emotions at stake, and they are elevated when you are a child, and you are very upset and sad and depressed, and these are feelings you should be having. These are normal. And depression strikes the rich and the poor alike equally. I am not invalidating the emotions of teenagers. I don't want this to sound like I am. What I am saying is when you are a full-grown adult man and your writing sounds more like the bad poetry from an angry teenager than adult novel writing, this is a problem. This is not a good, right? This isn't good writing. That's what I'm saying. I'm sorry to any teenager that I upset. You feel that way. You work through it. You'll grow out of it. I promise you will. Well, maybe not your depression. You might have to work through that for the rest of your life. You know, that might live with you. That's something that even adults deal with, but you will evolve and grow and age. I promise. Also, it's a little late in the video to be adding this now, but I do want to say that if for some reason you are one of those people, the vast majority of people who absolutely loved and enjoyed this book, I don't want to take that away from you either. I don't see it. I don't understand how anybody enjoyed this, but to each his own. Do not feel like I'm attacking you, or please don't feel like I'm attacking you. I'm really attacking the book. If I'm attacking anything at all, and I'm attacking this writing because it's just not good. Anyway, I'm going to be done now, and I think I've already let this slip further into the aggressive sounding kind of talk that I didn't want it to be, so I apologize for that. I'm sorry. Anyway, like I said, can't put a number on it because I didn't even finish the book. It would be unfair to the book to even put a number on it. I'll just say I DNF'd it. And as always, everybody, the link for my Patreon's in the description below. The link for my Discord's in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.